Welcome to this topic on IT architecture, and I want to achieve a few learning outcomes from this particular module. Firstly, I want to describe the notion of spaghetti architecture, explain what that is. I'd like to identify the desirable qualities of an architecture, and finally to explain some of the challenges associated with IT architecture complexity in today's organizations. So let's talk about spaghetti. Here's a plate of spaghetti. I'm sure you all love to eat spaghetti. So here's my question. What would happen if you pulled on a strand of spaghetti? Do you know what other strands of spaghetti will be affected by that? Well, it's actually unlikely. I mean, if you have a plate of spaghetti and the spaghetti is all kind of jumbled and mixed up, if you pull a strand, it's actually very difficult for you to know what other strands are going to be impacted or moved as a consequence of pulling that particular strand. And this, unfortunately, is the case with many large organizations. If you look at their IT setup, a lot of big organizations will have hundreds, probably thousands of different IT applications, and they may be connected in various kind of different ways, and it basically really is a very difficult arrangement. And this is what we call spaghetti architecture, because everything is fused together and it's not very well planned and it's not very well organized. So if we think about well-designed architecture, this is probably a good example of that. If you look at a modern bicycle, and with a modern bicycle, you can actually take out the components and replace them with newer components, upgrade the components, and you can almost do that with any aspect, any element of a bike. So it could be the bicycle frame, it could be the seat, could be the brakes, it could be tires, could be the gears. If any aspect needs upgrading, you can actually just take it out and put it back in, and it'll work just fine. There's no impact on any of the other components. Obviously, you have to get the right sizes and the right dimensions of the parts, but it's pretty much plug and play. So if we think about a well-designed architecture, one of the things that we're looking for is kind of ease of maintenance, ease of upgrading. It's an arrangement whereby you can look at any component, any aspect, and you can decide to upgrade that without affecting any other elements of the existing architecture. So I think that's one of the key features of a well-designed architecture. So there are a number of different qualities. We've already talked about one, but another quality that is important is reliability, particularly in the context of IT, because as you know, IT very much supported on a 24/7 basis. Businesses really can't run with IT, so you need that reliability to deliver IT services to an agreed level or standard. And clearly, if there's any significant downtime, that typically has a big impact on the business. We also think about whether or not a architecture is aligned to the business. And sometimes we talk about IT not really being aligned to the business. In fact, it might be difficult to meet business requirements because the IT architecture is so difficult to change. So business alignment is one of those general qualities that we also talk about in terms of our architecture. Agile is a new phrase that's come up in the last 10 years or so, and it refers to the ease at which one can adapt an architecture to accommodate new business requirements. So people are talking about flexibility, the ability to respond quickly to business changes. So agility is one of the features that we look for in an IT architecture. Scalability is another important feature, And as business volumes rapidly grow, many organizations are their business will grow very quickly. They'll move into different geographical markets. They'll have new products. They'll have new marketing plans. And sometimes the business growth is really kind of very, very high. So the ability of IT to scale to meet that is obviously an important feature. Cost optimized, because everyone looks at budgets these days. They look for value for money. They want to make sure there's a good return on investment. And IT services are changing all the time. The providers are also changing all the time. So the way in which we deliver IT through the architecture, we all obviously want to deliver that in a very cost-effective manner. So cost optimized is a quality that we can look for in an architecture. And finally, what I talked about earlier, maintainability, the ease at which we can make changes in one part of the architecture without having negative ramifications on another part of the architecture. So these are some of the architectural qualities that we can think about when we discuss the architecture. Of course, IT architecture is extremely complex for many organizations these days. This is probably how it looks when you have lots of different systems designed at different points in time, and they're all interconnected in different ways. It really is characteristic of what we called earlier the spaghetti architecture. And you can see it's all jumbled up. Obviously, organizations have been using IT for a long time, and IT itself has evolved over the years. So many organizations will have this mix of older legacy applications and newer technology and platforms. And lots of companies still use mainframe computers to do a lot of the back-end transaction processing. And that really is a mainstream of a lot of IT environments these days. And around that, you still have a lot of legacy systems. A lot of companies, for example, still use COBOL, which is rather dated. I mean, you have a lot of newer technologies these days, but it just goes to show that there's a diversity in the technologies that organizations have. There are also concept of islands of information. So many applications weren't designed to be integrated. They were designed many years ago, and it's actually difficult to extract information from that. So you have a lot of systems that don't talk to each other, that really kind of operate as islands. And obviously, challenges of trying to integrate all these applications together. People want real-time, instant integration. They want that kind of responsiveness these days. And if you're dealing with an application that was designed 30 years ago based on batch processing, you're not going to get that level of responsiveness. So that there's an issue with trying to integrate all these systems in some kind of sensible and organized way. And obviously, as complexity rises up, the costs of IT kind of also escalate, and that's the danger with the IT environment these days, is that costs can escalate quickly out of control. It can actually consume a significant proportion of the company's budget, and business users obviously get frustrated because they're not feeling they're getting value from IT, and it just becomes really a big drag on resources. And that's why we see a lot of companies outsource their IT these days to try and pass on those challenges to a dedicated IT provider. But that is the issue with a complex IT environment. The more complex it becomes, the less value it's seen to add to the business, and the more costly it becomes just to maintain that architecture. So one of the things that people would want to try and do is to try and reduce IT complexity so that it's easier to manage and affect change, and so that it's also less costly. So just to sum up, these are some of the key challenges from an IT architectural standpoint. as I mentioned, increasing overall IT complexity, IT just becoming more and more embedded within the organizations. Organizations obviously becoming very dependent on IT, and it just increases the overall complexity. There's a mix of different incompatible technologies that companies have adopted over the years. Some of those are legacy technologies, and now we have newer web-based technologies. So there's a whole diversity of technologies, not all of which are compatible. Lots of applications, as I mentioned, have their own database, and they don't really share information. So what you end up with is data being duplicated across many different applications, and that leads to a lot of inconsistency. There's also this integration challenge where we're trying to integrate different kinds of systems. And as I mentioned, some of the legacy applications, they may not have open interfaces, and it might not be easy for you to extract that information. So accessing these interfaces and trying to integrate these applications in different ways, that's just a big, complex challenge. And obviously, the more complex it is, the harder it is to maintain and enhance the applications within your IT architecture. And sometimes, particularly with the older technologies, it's actually hard to upgrade them. So these are some of the challenges associated with the modern IT architecture.